Hello, my name is Grian. It's been about 3 months since we made our last house, can you believe it? And this is what we are making today. Another suburban house design, but I feel like this one is going a little bit above and beyond what we're a bit used to. This is going to be slightly larger, so prepare yourselves and I'm going to try and be as thorough as possible. We're going to start off by making our base shape on the floor as we normally do. We're starting off with a 9-block wall, and there will be a bunch of dimensions in a second from an aerial view, so it should be pretty easy to follow once you see that. Now, of course, I don't encourage you to make them exactly block for block, but there will be the ability to if you so wish. What we're trying to do here is make a large rectangular shape, but add just a very slight variation in the shape itself, so it's not completely square. Okay, so this is the shape we've gone for. That little indent, here are all the dimensions that you'll need to make this base layer, and it is important that this bit is correct. However, I do encourage you to try and make a slightly different shape. It really won't make that much difference if you do one. Okay, so this is slightly different in format, this tutorial, because it's a more complicated house than I normally do on this channel. So what we're going to do is slightly odd. We're going to make towers in the middle, directly in the middle of each of our walls where there's going to be a roof. This one is 20 blocks tall, along with this one. This is going to be the two front parts of our house. We're also going to make several others. Remember, these are directly in the middle. If you place these either side of the middle, it's going to come out wonky, so do make sure. We need a third pole that is 20 high on the back of the building, and on the two sides we're going to need 2 more. Both of those will be 23 blocks high. Now, these represent the absolute top tips of the walls. Now, either side of them, we're going to make sure we go down 1 block at a time and start supplying the A-frame to the build. This will very quickly result in the shape of the house coming together. So, if you start with the highest points and work your way down around them, everything should really start coming together, as you can see here. Now, once you hit the sides of your buildings, that's where you need to stop, and it should all come together like a big puzzle piece. Now, these are intentionally very tall, so if your build looks ridiculously high, even from the start, do go with it, because it will make sense later on why it is so tall. We will need to be putting in a halfway point and all sorts of things, so bear with me. It is a very large build and you will need a lot of blocks. So we're immediately going to go ahead and start filling in the roof, which is kind of odd for my channel because this is not how we normally structure things, but trust me, it makes sense on this build to get it out of the way. So you'll notice that I'm using a full block here instead of a staircase. You are more than welcome to use a staircase or however else you want to do your roof, but for this particular build, I will be using a full block. And that may even make sense later on in a different video to this one. So, you fill it in like so, it should all slot together, you just follow the nooks of the A-frames all the way around and it should connect up quite nicely. Now, on these two A-fronts here, what we need to do is create a little ledge, and I've marked out in oak directly where that is going to happen. It is 7 blocks from the floor. And then you go ahead and fill in that extra layer over the top so that there is an overhang on this build. However, once it's all finished, this will be much less noticeable. It's a very minor detail, but things like this really do help a build stand out. So now we're going to fill in this little bit that we purposely left earlier because we want to make sure that the roof sits nicely in between it. So it is 2 blocks back from your overhang and then connect the roof up afterwards. Once that's all done, it should sit very nicely together. And if yours is very slightly different from mine, that is totally fine. You can work with it if you're 1 or 2 blocks off. Try not to get hung up on following a tutorial block for block, because it's only going to get frustrating when 1 block is out of place. Just try and make it work with what you've got. Now we're going to do the outlines to our A-frames and the rest of the roof. Very simple, and we will be using staircases for this so that the roof itself just peeks out over the top of those staircases. It's quite a nice effect. Lots of people avoid using full blocks in their roofs, but for buildings like this, it really does make a lot of sense. So at the moment I am just making my way round the building entirely, highlighting every part of the roof. I just made a mistake there by making that bit of staircase in line with it instead of below it. You want to make sure that it's nice and flush with the A-frame. So you need to also make sure that your staircases are accompanied by upside down staircases to make it that little bit more thick. It just helps highlight the entire build. Once you've made your way all the way round the house, you might want to add a couple of slabs either side to add a little indent and some detailing to this part. So as you can see, things are immediately starting to come together. Now I know I didn't include this in the base because I wanted to keep things simple initially, but we're going to add what will become a garage later on. It is 19 blocks long and 9 wide. Of course, you could make this slightly bigger, slightly smaller, however you want, and it is 7 blocks tall. We will come back to that part later. On the other side of the build, we also have a flat surface to work with, and we're going to add another little part to this. Little extensions like this make a big difference to the overall effect of the house. It is 9 long and 8 wide. Again, lots of room for your own take on how to do this. However, for this little bit here, I wouldn't recommend making it massive, as it's supposed to accompany the house, not dominate it. For the floor, we will be missing out the block around the edge, and this is for a reason that will make sense later on. And then what we're going to do is a few blocks back, or maybe directly in the middle, we want to create another A-frame to a very medium-ish height. Definitely don't go to the top of the build. And then again, we want to complete the same roof style as before. However, we want it to overhang to the point where we missed out. So perhaps half of it will overhang. This allows us to create a little balcony. You may also notice that I have changed the roof to some log as well. Now we're going to focus on making some of the meat of this build now that we have the main structure. We can start off by making the front door. It's always a good place to start in my opinion, as it will set the scene for the rest of the build. Now you can make your own details or shape or whatever you want, but I've gone for an arch made out of quartz with a spruce wood backdrop. Now we're going to need to place some pillars in some very specific locations, but if you have a slightly different house to the one that I've made and you're not following block for block, just place it in a similar location and it will work out just fine. In each corner, we need to make our way outwards diagonally 2 blocks and place the base pillar. And the same on the other side, and again either side of our 5 wide entrance, all in one line. Build them up just short of our oak marker, and that's where they're going to sit for the time being. It's always handy just to have those in place while working on everything else. And what we're going to be adding now is a foundation layer to the build. Some cobblestone staircase, along with a birch slab on the top, and some full blocks in the corners. Make your way all the way around the build, and it will transition the walls into the floor quite nicely, which is always a very harsh right angle. You can leave it out where appropriate and put it in where you feel like it. I added a quick window here just to test the waters and to make sure I got the height right. It is 3 blocks high, and then we're going to start off by making a slab sloping upwards towards the pillars, and where it meets is very important, which is why I added the window in to make sure that it fit. It should all sit together quite nicely. As you can see, the oak liner is just sitting where the slab meets the top. It all looks quite rather confusing, but if you're 1 block off here or there, you can adapt your build fairly easily. Now we're linking up the outside of the pillars with some slabs made out of quartz, and then we're placing a nice roof over the top made out of spruce slab. Now it does look rather complicated, but essentially all we're doing is using slabs from the bottom and the top meeting in the middle. And then we're creating a little A-frame over the front of the door to create a patio. This also needs to overhang just 1 block from our slabs on the outside. And then underneath I've just filled it in with some also spruce slabs. Now, it doesn't matter if you mess up a little bit or if it doesn't work out, it's very easy to adapt this. I do know it looks a bit complicated, but it really is just a tiny roof overhanging with some pillars without the walls. This is what's going to break up the build, sort of split it in half and make it look like it has a ton of shape. If you make your way all the way around the extension as well, you can see that it's really starting to tie this build together, and that's exactly why we had the front of our build overhang just 1 block, so it fits together. On the garage side, I've added in 2 doors, as this is a larger house. I want it to have 2 cars available. I don't know, you could have 3, it depends how many cars you want. And then again, doing the same technique for the roof, adding in slabs, and it should connect up very naturally. This time, instead of using full block, it is a slab, meaning that every time you put in a quartz slab going up half a block, it should all sit quite nicely and fit together like so. Again, if you get the dimensions correct on this and the A-frames, it should all slot together rather nicely. Now I'm going to add a few more windows. I've gone for a 3x3 directly in the center. Again, setting my glass 1 block back, and either side in the walls, we're adding a very strange detail, but trust me, it really does tie this building together. We're going to add some staircases made out of birch, just 2 blocks, and it's going to create these tiny little crevices inside the walls, and it's going to add that little level of detail that will make this build look extra nice. And then again, some trapdoors either side of our windows really kind of brings this together, along with, again, with some more staircases to add those little nooks and crannies. As we're not adding many layers of depth in this build, we're going to put it inside the wall itself, and then of course replicate it over to the right hand side. But in the center, we're going to do something slightly different, just a different way of decorating the windows. We're going to lay trapdoors facing outwards, which have less impact on the wall, and it's more minimalist. So that really does work quite well. And in the bottom right hand corner, we're basically going to add exactly the same window, but also adding in those slabs that slant upwards and meet our overhang together. You could also add some glass panes to create a bit of a curved shape. It's entirely up to you. On the garage, also going to add a small level of detail. It's a very simple technique using the staircases and just some windows and maybe even a fence in there as well. Now we've got a big chunk of wall here to detail, and there's a lot of freedom in how you can do this. I'm basically going to do exactly what we did on the front, add more windows, more trapdoors, and more little details using staircases, and I kind of fiddled around with the sizes of them, trying not to make it look too overcrowded. I probably could have done this a bit better, but overall it works quite nicely. And then there's all these little areas like here where you probably just want to add in a little bit of a base layer, maybe a small window, and try not to overdo it. I think probably my downfall with this design is I used a lot of trapdoors. One tiny little detail to add here is the guttering, the little pipe that adds at the corner. It just helps add in that suburban effect and ties everything together. Those little details overall make quite a nice difference. Over on the little extension on the side, we've got much smaller windows to add, or maybe none at all. It is up to you. There is nothing wrong with having a bit of blank wall. Like I said, I probably overdid it on the old trapdoors. For example, down here, I decided to add a smaller window because I thought I was slightly overdoing it, and there's no shame in that. On houses, you don't have windows absolutely pasted everywhere. Sometimes you just have smaller ones at a higher or lower part of the building. Over here, where I said we were going to make our balcony, I added a few iron trapdoors along with some cobblestone wall and a tiny window to go with it. Again, there's a lot of freedom in how you can detail this part of the build. I also added a mandatory chimney made out of brick. This just helps set aside that this side of the house has an extension and is slightly larger than the other half, and it helps balance out the build a little bit. Now we've got a few more walls to fill in with some windows. By now you know the drill, but I also added in a back door there as I thought it would be like a utility room. There's an awful lot of space inside this build, so no need to worry about that. Plenty of space to get creative. Now this is the last little piece of roof that I'm going to add, and it was completely optional. It doesn't actually impact the build at all, but because this was such a large bit of wall here that didn't have anything, I thought it necessary to try and break it up. That way I didn't have to put as many windows in. As you can see, I only put 2 in, and I also made sure that this side of the wall had those little nooks in the side to try and give it a bit more detail in it, and then another more formal back door to this building. And then again, adding more windows. The windows are just everywhere on this build. It is a very large house, and it will seem like there are just massive portions of wall that need filling in, such as this section, which slightly extends outwards. Now you can see why we try to break up builds with these little bits of shape. It's so that it makes it easier to add small windows in and such the like. So on this bit, added nooks either side of it, as we have done on the other parts of the build. Also added a base, which is the only part on the back that I have done, and then added some more 3x3 windows and some tiny details added in as well. And all of that added together makes the build really tie in nicely. And I didn't add too many details to the garage, as it is a garage and you don't typically have many windows in it or anything that may make it stand out. Now, there's only a few final touches to do, and that is sort of the terrain and the gardening. Suburban houses like this do tend to have some very fancy gardens and paths and parking and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to add a bit of tarmac. We're going to outline where the garage is and where the parking spaces are. So I've marked it out with some polished andesite and filled it in with some normal andesite. I also decided to mix in some gravel later on, but for now I've just left it as andesite, and some leaves in the front there that are defined by the spruce slab around the outside. And that's pretty much all of the build put in together. Those little details are of course completely optional. You could put in some flowers if you fancied a bit more color in this build, but overall it's the shape of each individual part that really makes it, mixed in with the little details. I absolutely love this design. It is by far one of my favorite suburban houses, even if it is slightly more complicated to build, and trust me, it was very difficult to explain how to make this. I had to come up with a technique that would be semi-easy to follow without going too complicated too quickly, and of course not making it a perfect block-for-block tutorial, otherwise it could have ended up being an hour-long video. Anyway, this is a very large suburban house, and you should be able to make slight variations on this, no worries, using the same techniques as I have. And I want to thank Pearlescent Moon for helping me put this together. She was a big help for me recently, where I've been putting out plenty of content. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you've enjoyed this design. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you in the next video. Any ideas? Leave them in the comments. Goodbye!